Hey everybody, welcome to the Daily Reflection on Awake and Aware Eating and Living. I want to talk today about day one. And for any of you who have been in addiction recovery for any length of time, you understand what day one is. Day one is the day where you commit to doing whatever it takes to staying away from your addiction. Day one usually follows a big binge, in food addiction recovery, in alcohol or drug addiction, a big bender. It usually follows a lot of pain and suffering and desperation because once again, you used. And so I wanted to talk about day one because yesterday was day one for me. So, I've explained before, I have been a food addict for as long as I can remember. And what that looked like is even when I was a little girl, 3, 4 years old, I remember very well wanting to eat more food than I was allowed, thinking about food all the time, trying to come up with elaborate plans to get it, loving the holidays because my parents were a little more flexible with what we were allowed to eat and food was all around. Really binging from the time I was 3, that's my earliest memory, whenever I could. And I couldn't binge a lot because my parents kept a pretty tight wrap on what I ate, but at the holiday times, Halloween, Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving, I was really able to binge. And I tried to do it whenever else I could. So for most of my life, I really had a lot of shame and a lot of guilt about that. I had no idea. I was told that it was because I was weak-willed, that I should be able to control this, that there was just something wrong with me psychologically, emotionally, mentally, not that I had a biochemical condition. And I learned over 20 years ago that I had an addiction. And that was a good start. I learned that I have an addiction. It's not that I'm weak-willed at all, but my body doesn't respond to those foods the way other people's bodies who don't have addiction responds. That when I eat certain foods, sugar, flour, for me wheat too, and volume, a large quantity of food binging, it creates a biochemical response in me that literally renders me powerless. And anybody who doesn't have this can never understand what it's like unless you have some other addiction. So it's been a tough road being around non-addicts and talking about this because they'll say things well-meaning, trying to be nice, like just don't eat it, just don't buy it, just stay away from it. Or they'll say things like, I think you're being too rigid. Why don't you just let yourself eat a little bit of sugar or let yourself eat a little bit of flour? Like, don't be so rigid. The reason that you have this problem is because you're so rigid. None of that is true. And again, for people who aren't addicts, especially food addicts, you cannot understand this. That eating a little bit sets off a chemical response in the brain that creates craving. And the sensation of craving is the same feeling as being at the bottom of a swimming pool, needing to come up for air, desperately needing to come up for air because you're out of breath. And that's craving. Craving is this desperate need to use. Food for me, alcohol, drugs. Again, that thing, well, don't be so rigid. Let yourself have a little bit. That's like saying to an alcoholic or a heroin addict, just have a little bit. Just have a little bit and then stop. And unfortunately, our culture hasn't been trained about this with food, even though there is so much information out there now that supports this. There have been so many studies that support this. So let's get back to day one. I went through day one again yesterday because on Thursday I had a horrific sugar binge, and I hadn't had a sugar binge since April 28th, 2018. And it had been coming on for a while. I had started using caffeine again, which definitely creates that biochemical craving in me for sugar and excess food. It doesn't for everybody, but it does for me. I had started eating off plan. You know, I have a very specific food plan that's very nutritious, very healthy. It keeps me very healthy and stable. But I started to eat off it. I started to exercise a little too much hiking, a little too much activity, and all of a sudden I needed more food, of course. I started to get a little bit more active, a little more multitasking. All of a sudden I need more food. And I started to eat off plan. And that eating off plan like that in itself is not harmful, but what it does for me, because of my advanced nature food addiction, it leads me to more and more and more. And I can't stop, and I become powerless. I'm rendered powerless. And so Thursday, I was powerless and didn't know it was coming, didn't think it would happen, and it did. And so yesterday was day one, and day one sucks. Horrible headache, really sick to my stomach, feeling really guilty, ashamed, maybe even sad, knowing that I'm sick again. It's almost as if I have cancer and I've had a relapse in cancer. And let me tell you, people, late stage food addiction is as severe, it is as deadly and as devastating as cancer. There is no difference. It is horrible. And so being on day one, just that hopelessness of what life is going to look like. And I was able, through all of my training, through all of my emotional training, spiritual training, training on addiction, I was able to turn that around all day long. All day long, my mind, because it was so altered by sugar and other addictive substances, well, sugar and flour. All day long, I wanted to go into the despair. I wanted to go into the hopelessness of day one. You know, my group that I belong to, I can't lead meetings for a couple of weeks because they don't want people leading meetings who are in day one, you know, really until you have 14 days. And I love leading meetings. So lots of sad things, going back to my people who support me and saying, I overate again, I binged on sugar. And knowing I can't help it. It's a biochemical condition. It's not because I'm weak-willed. It's not because I'm not emotionally healthy. It's not because I'm not spiritually fit. It's none of those things. It literally is like having the measles or the flu or cancer, and it's like, and I just need a treatment program for it. So day one, as my mind kept going to the negative, as my mind kept going to the desperation of day one, I kept reframing. I kept training my mind into the real fact that the treatment for active food addiction is amazing. The treatment is eating a weighed and measured food plan consistently. Lots of food, good food, nutritious food. It's feeding myself in a loving, kind, compassionate way, day in and day out, making eating a priority, not making it an afterthought, not organizing my day and then all of a sudden going, oops, I forgot it's lunchtime. If you're a food addict, especially a late stage, you can't live like that. You need to literally plan your meals like you would for a baby or a child. And isn't that so loving? Isn't that so kind? I also need to be still more often. I need to stop multitasking because multitasking short circuits my brain, and I want to replenish the brain chemistry by eating. I need to connect with the God of my understanding, that spirit within me, the spirit of the universe that's all loving. That's part of my treatment plan. I need to connect with other people that are on this journey. I need to really mindfully, with awareness and being awake, plan my day every day, one day at a time, so that it supports my recovery. It supports nurturing and caring for myself. So that's the treatment plan for active food addiction. And there's so many tools available. There's meetings, there's writing, there's lots of literature out there, there's phone calls, there's face-to-face connection, there's praying, there's meditation, there's so many tools, there's so many possibilities, affirmations that you can use to heal from active food addiction. Because what happens is as as I stop eating addictive foods, as I start eating a weighed and measured food plan again consistently, my brain heals, my body heals, and it doesn't take it away from me. I will always have this condition, but it does make it so that it's manageable and that I can make choices day in and day out. So I got through day 1, I'm on day 2 now, and I'll be recording something on day 2 very soon. But I'm gonna take you guys through this journey with me. I don't know how long I'll do it for, of what it's like recovering from active food addiction. So I hope everybody has a lot of awarenesses and a lot of awakenings today, and thanks for joining me.